I thank you so much. I'd now like to welcome Anne-Marie Richard, who is an art historian and curator, author, and the interim director at the Sotheby's Institute of Art. Her expertise is particularly European decorative arts, and I'm very curious to hear her presentation on education in the field of the art market.
Oh, good morning, or good evening, rather. Thank you very much for having me. I'm quite honored to be amongst all of you. And let me share my screen. I will start immediately with my presentation.
Anne-Marie, just make sure you've got the presentation view, right?
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
So just as a quick introduction, I am now the Interim Director of the Sotheby's Institute of Art for New York. I'm also the Master's Program Director for Fine Art, Decorative Arts and Design at the Institute, and I oversee the Master's in Art Business as well. The auction house was founded in 1744, and in 1969, they decided to implement an educational branch within the auction house. And that program was called the Works of Art course. I'm a graduate of that course, which no longer exists. Now everything has been restructured under 3 different master's programs. But the foundation of the Works of Art course is still alive within the program of Fine Art, Decorative Arts and Design, where we study historic homes and their collections, collectors and objects and the stories that they tell. So what we strive to do at the Institute is build an ecosystem of knowledge and skills, bearing in mind that the school, while has a very strong academic implementation, is also geared towards people who will end up working in the trade, in the commercial end of the art business. But what never changes is that we have a foundation of art history, connoisseurship, art market research, and art law within the 3 programs. The paintings that I chose to illustrate this slide is on the left, a wonderful picture by Adrian Isebrand that is located in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which illustrates one of the first composition to portray a professional activity. And the title of this painting is Man Weighing Gold. It's from approximately 1515. And the slide to the right is by a woman painter, an underrepresented category of the 19th century named Emily Osborne. And the painting illustrates a widow. As you can see, she's wearing black with her child. She is an artist, and she's going to the local art dealer to sell her paintings. And I think between these 2 pictures, it really illustrates, grosso modo, how we teach and what we teach and the mission of our teaching, the underlayers of all these images and objects. So the pedagogy of learning at the Institute, and when I did the course, the Works of Art course, has never changed. It's always been object handling. Now we are on pause because of the world sanitary pandemic, but once the world reopens, we shall go back to this way of learning, where you see on the left, this is one of my class. We go to the auction house and we talk to the specialists, be it silver or ceramic or old master paintings, and the students handle the objects to feel how they weigh, how they are made, how they are marked, and really observed from close proximity what these objects really feel like. And to the right, we have a slide of a specialist, which is what a lot of our students end up being at the end of the day. If they don't work at the auction house or one of the auction houses, there are several within New York City and outside of New York, of course, Some of them exceptionally end up working in museums. A lot of them end up working in art and finance, in banks, which have many collections of art that need to be managed and appraised. So we also, not just outside of the objects, the traditional objects, we also teach jewelry, gems and jewelry. Of course, this is also on pause right now because we are reassessing how we will go moving forward after the pandemic, how many students will be allowed within showrooms and back rooms of diamond cutters and jewelry dealers within the city. And the picture to the right are hands of my students touching a wall. And that is one thing that we can still do. Examine public monuments around the city and look at architecture. As you know, decorative arts derives from architecture, and the materials that you might find in buildings sometimes may translate into objects d'art as well. So it's very important that even though we are in a pandemic, there are still things that we can do until the world reopens. Another panel of our way of teaching is to take field studies trips. So when I was a student, my first category of expertise was Chinese and Japanese and Korean ceramics. And I was invited to Burleigh House to handle the objects and discuss them. And in London, that is still something that the students do and will resume doing once it's safe for everyone to do. In New York, we travel around the city to all the historic homes. So that would be Merchant's House in New York City, for example, outside of New York, perhaps Boscobel. And we would take longer trips to go to Rhode Island to visit the Newport houses. For example, I'm just showing Rough Point, which was Doris Duke's residence in Newport, which was built in the 1890s, which is filled with European decorative arts as well as Islamic art and Asian works of art. So how do we teach art for our future art specialists during a world pandemic? Well, one thing that has never changed is the component of art history. And we have a very strong library and especially many subscription to e-resources. So the pandemic has kind of had us double down on research, which is very good for the students until the world reopens. So I'm just showing you one of the examples of the subscriptions we have, the JSTOR. We have a close relationship with the Watson Library. The Watson Library has a very good digitalized archival materials, just as the Frick does. So that's all very important. We are teaching them how to access this information without feeling insecure about their future thesis or capstone projects. Provenance is a big part of what we teach as well, because being in the art trade, everything has to be vetted and authenticated, pardon me, and that is related to the science of provenance research. So we have students that actually now work at the Getty Foundation that were trained at the Institute and that know how to access these resources. So digitally, you can access to a lot of material and also by appointment. One of the slides I'm showing is some of the Nodler records kept at the Frick. A few years ago, I led a class on archival sources around the city. And one of our pit stops was obviously the Frick archives, where we went in a very small group, of course, and the books were open for us. But these resources are also available online right now. Many museums and libraries are just digitalizing at an incredible speed. And the book of jewelry to the right is actually a book that was of patterns that was exhibited at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which is also open at a limited capacity, but there's still a lot of material that is accessible. Being related to an auction house, of course, we have a very large library of auction catalogs and art gallery catalogs, and those catalogs are incredible sources for provenance research and also for the history of the art market, as many of these catalogs have the pre-sale estimates printed in the catalog, either in a separate page or within the catalog. And we also have a large collection of price lists. So we can actually do retrospective market research. We also teach the language of art. So the terminology of decorative arts, for example. I'm just using auction house description of this Empire Ormolu mounted Sèvres porcelaine Guéridon, Table des Palais Royaux, commissioned by Napoleon I, signed and inscribed, Manufacture Royale de Sèvres, 1816. All of this quote unquote jargon is explained in class. We dissect and really teach our students what is the language of art, just like there's a language of business, there's a language of trade and commerce, there is a language of decorative arts. So the glossary of terminology is incredibly important. I picked these two pictures because they also represent how we teach, looking at objects, contemplating the objects, and understanding the compositions, the colors, their context within history. So we have the ambassadors of 1533 of Hans Holbein the Younger. And for example, you have at the base of one of the ambassador this anamorphic rendition of a skull. So we will go into explaining exactly what that means and the history of this type of composition. And to the left, we have James Drummond, The Return of Mary, Queens of Scots to Edinburgh of 1870, which is now in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which is an unfinished painting. But there's a lot of history within that unfinished painting, not just from a compositional point of view, but also from a market point of view. This is a picture that was for many years misattributed. It was cataloged improperly and passed for what I called anonymous, 19th century anonymous. And until scholarly research was properly conducted, nobody paid attention to this picture. It was bought in a couple of times until it was finally properly cataloged and sold at auction and eventually purchased by the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Objet d'art, so there's the whole history of their functions, their patronage, who commissioned them, what was the artist's intent, were they objects just for the pleasure and the enlightenment of the user, or were they just made to show the skill of the craftsman? So we have James Cox, 1765, a mechanical automaton clock in the collection of Rough Point. And we have the famous Cellini salt, which was stolen and then returned, which is an incredible example of mythology and I would say sea and earth combined. That you have this entire world in this object, and the history is quite fascinating. It's now in the Kunsthistorische Museum, but was initially commissioned by Francis I, who's also responsible for commissioning the Mona Lisa. So there's this whole world just around these objects that we explain and share with our students, so they understand how to contextualize not just history, but also contemporary art. Which brings me to design. So for example, the Damien Hirst diamond skull, which is the iconography is within the category of memento mori, so we can go back in time and explain this work of art also from a market point of view. And then we have the Haas brothers, the California twins that design these curious objects, which may or may not relate to the idea of the cabinet of curiosity in the material, the ebony that's used for the horns, the bronze, and the fur, the natural history aspect of the object. We also teach artist studios and palettes, how they're used. Everything starts with an idea, with a line. The materials, these are pastels from 1905, French pastels. And to the right, we have Magna acrylic paint, which was conceived in the 40s and ended its manufacture in the 1970s. Materials is a big part of the science of authentication and the science of processes, artists' processes. And techniques. We also teach techniques of art, because if you don't know the techniques, how can you talk about something when you don't know how it is made? So I chose here to illustrate this point, a miniature Roman chalcedony head mounted on an enamel gold bust, which is actually a married piece. The Roman head is from the late 1st century, and the bust is a 16th century Italian confection. And to the right, we have a Belle Epoque drawing that is entirely conceived by blotting and wash on paper. So there is absolutely no outline in this work on paper. It is now in the Van Gogh Museum. And it was one of the works that was exhibited at TIFAF through the booth of Stephen Hongpin, who is a very well-known old master drawing and 19th century drawing dealer, who's also one of our graduates. Notions of conservation and restoration are always mentioned in our classes, whether in contemporary art, in fine art and decorative arts, or in the Masters of Art business. What is condition? What is conservation? What is restoration? The tiers of condition in corresponding value, because we are market centric. Are we looking at objects that have a cultural value or are considered a financial asset? And how will breakage or restoration or conservation impact that value moving forward? What is considered acceptable in the market? What is a craquelure that is natural, that shows the natural age of a painting? And what is a seam that's been perhaps poorly repaired? How much does it impact? What is museum condition? What is academic condition? What is considerable desirable in the market within different categories? So these objects might, to somebody that doesn't understand the object, be considered in very poor condition. While in fact, these are quite desirable objects if you're interested in American decorative arts, where condition is really in the eye of the beholder, in that something that looks not pristine, but that shows normal wear is actually what is considered marketable and desirable. These are 18th century works of art from Rhode Island and from Massachusetts. And they fetch quite a pretty penny at auction. We also study signatures and stamps. So here, what is a collector's stamp? What is an estate stamp? Here we have the estate sales stamp for Delacroix. And on the right, we have just a blow up of Renoir's initial on a wash in watercolor drawing. Here are different types of signatory stamps, essaying marks for silver, and different stamps on a 19th century piece of ceramic. The reverse of painting and labels, be it customs label, exhibition labels, gallery labels, inscriptions, or is something that we also investigate because what is in the back or in the base of an object might be more telling than what is in the front. Furniture joinery and labels and inscriptions, also on furniture and works of art. For example, this dovetailing in this 18th century library table is very unusual. So we will discuss the different types of joinery, what they mean, and how to actually understand how the object is made and marketed, be it via a marchand mercier, the ancestors to the interior designers or dealers, And here we also have on the right a label of a Caribbean Haitian piece of furniture. And this is another category that we are investigating right now, is all of the West Indies and Caribbean contribution to the conversation in decorative arts, which has been an underrepresented categories for centuries. So art markets, what I'm showing you here is actually a banknote composition for the 19th century. I thought that would illustrate very well the art market and the mechanics of the auction sale. So what happens in an auction? What is being consigned to the auction, and how is it picked to be shown in a category of an auction? So there's two different types of auctions. There's the live auction and more so now the online auctions. Where is the inventory for the auction? Well, we always talk about the 3 Ds. I always talk about the 4 Ds. So the stock comes from estates, so death, divorce, equitable distribution, unfortunately, damage, also objects that have been damaged or that have been compromised in some way, oftentimes end up at auction, and debt. People in debt end up putting their objects at auction. And also there are people that just need to de-accession, that would be the 50, de-accession from their collection. So we explain the trends, the marketing that goes into selling a work of art. I'm showing you here the Salvador Mundi that was heavily restored and sold at Christie's for in excess of $450 million. And the Bansky that was sold at Sotheby's in London that self-destroyed during the auction as the hammer was coming down, and that sold for 1.4 million, where the artist actually said, I did not destroy the work of art, I actually created a new one. So all of these, what I call the participatory drivers, are analyzed in the classroom. And why put an old master painting within a contemporary art sale sandwiched between a Vija Selmin and a Jean-Michel Basquiat? We explain retrospective sales, for example, 2 images that look exactly the same. One, November 2010, goes for $25,000. In January 2011 for $300,000. What is the difference? They're both by Handy Warhol. They're both 1972. They're both edition of 250, but the one on the right that fetched 200,000 was actually shot with a gun by Dennis Hopper. So that becomes a collaborative work, and the story, the narrative of this particular work of art actually gives it a plus value. Underrepresented artists are now the latest trends. So 2017, Barclay Hendricks picture goes for 900,000. 2 years later, it goes for in excess of $3 million, almost $4 million. So what does that say about the market, about the scholarship that is necessary to unearth all of these underrepresented categories of art? Is it just a trend? Will it last? Or is it just a moment in time? These are important questions. The same goes with a cause, for example, is all over the news. This appropriation of an appropriation, the cause album that fetched in Hong Kong in excess of 14 million in 2019. And those enormous sculptures of these comic book types of figures that go for close to $2 million. What is happening in the market? Is it a return to infantilizing the works of art? Is that what contemporary art is all about? Blowing up toys? And is this the future of the art market? It could be. What about collectibles? That's a new category that is now overshadowed a lot of traditional categories of works of art. These are sneakers that sold for $560,000. Art licensing in merchandise, the idea of luxury. So buying and selling at auction is an act of luxury, but now luxury and fashion and auctions are colliding and creating new markets? So those are other questions that we discuss in class. Market disruptors, NTF, that's the last slide, non-fungible tokens. That's the next frontier. So we all have to adapt to these new trends and fashions in order to move forward. And I just wanted to end with this wonderful painting of Charles Peale called The Artist in His Museum of 1822. Charles Peale was the founder of two academies, namely the Pennsylvania Academy of Art, one of the nation's first museum. And he had a vision. Here he is showing not just specimens of natural history, but also portraits of great Americans. And his statement is part philosophical, which is, what is the nature of education? Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Anne-Marie. That was really fantastic, extremely insightful. And I think everybody who's listening already realizes the different discourses, depending on, what institution you work for and the different focuses. So I'm really looking forward to a discussion afterwards.